Today on the Daily Dose, Alice takes a trip. First published in 1865, Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, now commonly shortened to Alice in Wonderland, was first conceived 3 years before publication, when Carroll and the Reverend Robinson Duckworth rode up the headwaters of the River Thames in a boat with 3 young girls, a day which Carroll remembered as the Golden Afternoon. Carroll, whose real name was Charles Dodson, was a professor of mathematics at Christ Church University at Oxford. And on that golden afternoon, Lorena, Edith, and Alice were the daughters of Christ Church University's Vice-Chancellor, Henry Liddell. The boat ride began at Folly Bridge, Oxford, and ended up 5 miles away in the Oxfordshire village of Godstow. Along the way, Carroll made up a story for the girls about a bored little girl named Alice who falls through a rabbit hole into a subterranean fantasy world populated by peculiar anthropomorphic creatures. All 3 girls became transfixed by the story, prompting Alice Liddell to ask that Carroll write it all down for her. Since its first publication, Alice in Wonderland has risen in stature to become one of the best-known and most popular works of English-language fiction. While its narrative, structure, characters, and imagery have been enormously influential in popular culture and literature, especially the fantasy genre, the work has never fallen out of print and has been translated into at least 97 languages. Character allusions are manifold, including Alice Liddell as herself, while Carroll is characterized as the dodo, because Dodson frequently stuttered when he spoke, which made him pronounce his last name as Dodo Dodson. Symbolism provides another rich landscape in the story, since most of the book's adventures may have been influenced by people, situations, and buildings in Oxford, and at Christ Church in particular. For example, the rabbit hole symbolized the actual stairs in the back of Christ Church's main hall, while a carving of a griffin and a rabbit were pulled directly from Ripon Cathedral, where Carroll's father was a canon. The book also makes many references to mathematics, which at the time of publication made the book a scathing satire on new modern mathematics that was just emerging in the mid-19th century. Today in the Daily Dose, Beowulf. Considered by many scholars to be the oldest and most translated surviving story in the English language, Beowulf is an epic poem in the Norse tradition of heroic mythology, made up of 3,182 alliterative lines. And while much debate circles around when the story was put to paper, most place its anonymous authorship between 975 and 1025 AD. Set in 6th century pagan Scandinavia, present-day Sweden and Denmark, the story's protagonist is a hero of the Geats, who sails to the aid of Danish King Hrothgar after the king's mead hall comes under repeated attacks by a swamp monster named Grendel, who has been killing the Danes for years when he nightly angers over the noise and music spilling from Hrothgar's mead hall. After his epic journey to Denmark, Beowulf defeats Grendel and later his swamp hag mother, returning to Geatland to reign as king for the next 50 years, until a thief disturbs a treasure mound guarded by a dragon. And while Beowulf slays the dragon in a nail-biting fight, Beowulf succumbs to his injuries and passes away. Scholars have also debated whether the story of Beowulf was passed down by generations of storytellers in the oral tradition, infusing much embellishment along the way, leading some scholars to suggest that the Christian elements of the story were added years after its Norse pagan origin. While the story of Beowulf is written largely in the West Saxon dialect of Old English, other dialectal forms are present as well, further suggesting a long history of oral transmission prior to the story's written form. Still others have pointed to plot elements found in other pagan stories, including the Icelandic saga of Grettir, the Norse tale of Rolf Kraki, and his bear shape-shifting servant Bodvar Barki, while other persistent attempts have been made linking Beowulf to Homer's Odyssey and Virgil's Aeneid. Much more definitive parallels have been drawn to the Bible, in particular many clear allusions to the books of Genesis, Exodus, and Daniel, making Beowulf one of the oldest English-language hotbeds of scholarly debate. Today on the Daily Dose, Ernest Hemingway. Born in 1899, Oak Park, Illinois, Ernest Hemingway cut his journalistic teeth writing for his high school newspaper before landing a job at the Kansas City Star, where he once said that on the Star you were forced to learn to write a simple declarative sentence. This is useful to anyone. Newspaper work will not harm a young writer and could help him if he gets out of it in time. Serving as an ambulance driver in the First World War, Hemingway was injured by an exploding mortar shell, receiving some 237 bits of shrapnel, an aluminum kneecap, and 2 Italian medals, later using his wartime experiences and close calls with death in several of his most acclaimed novels. Moving to Paris after the war, Hemingway became a leading figure in what his friend and mentor Gertrude Stein famously called the Lost Generation, which was a group of Paris-based artists who seemed lost or misdirected during the early years after the war, including F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ezra Pound, James Joyce, Sinclair Lewis, and Pablo Picasso. During his Paris years, Hemingway frequented the famous Running of the Bulls in Pamplona, Spain, which would lead to his debut novel, The Sun Also Rises, published in 1926. Other acclaimed novels would follow, including A Farewell to Arms, To Have and Have Not, A Movable Feast, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and An Old Man in the Sea, the later earning him a long-denied Pulitzer Prize in Literature. Married 4 times in a life filled with adventure, hard drinking, and beautiful women, before his death in 1961, Ernest Hemingway survived 2 plane crashes and numerous car crashes, as well as a shotgun wound while wrangling a shark off of Key West, Florida. After searching for U-boats in his beloved fishing boat Pilar, he also served as a foreign correspondent during the Second World War, where he reported on several of the war's most decisive turning point moments, including the D-Day landings at Normandy. Battling deteriorating mental and physical health in his later years, Hemingway retired to Ketchum, Idaho, where he committed suicide on July 2, 1961, ending the life of one of the most unique voices in modern literature. Today in the Daily Dose, F. Scott Fitzgerald. Born in 1896, St. Paul, Minnesota, after living much of his youth in New York State, Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald befriended future literary critic Edmund Wilson while studying at Princeton University, dropping out of college to join the Army during the First World War. Stationed in Alabama, Fitzgerald met Southern debutante Zelda Sayre, and while she had first rejected his proposal of marriage due to his lack of financial prospects, after the 1920 publication of his wildly successful debut novel, This Side of Paradise, which examined the lives and morality of carefree American youth at the dawn of the Jazz Age, Fitzgerald's instant elevation as the voice of the Roaring Twenties won Zelda's hand in marriage. Furthering his reputation as the spokesman of the Roaring Twenties, Fitzgerald's second novel, The Beautiful and the Damned, propelled him into a cultural elite, moving with his stunning Southern wife into the Parisian denizens of the Lost Generation, drinking and dancing until dawn with the likes of Gertrude Stein, Ernest Hemingway, E.E. Cummings, Hart Crane, and more. Despite Fitzgerald's financial success, his extravagant lifestyle accelerated his literary output with a parade of short stories for popular magazines such as the Saturday Evening Post, Collier's Weekly, and Esquire, at the same time thrusting the sought-after couple into alcoholism for Fitzgerald and mental illness for Zelda, which ultimately forced her into a mental institution for schizophrenia. After the lackluster publication of The Great Gatsby in 1925, Fitzgerald's 1934 publication of Tender is the Night ended his popularity during the hardscrabble days of the Great Depression, where many Americans blamed the flamboyant lifestyles of the flapper generation on the financial downfall of a nation. Living with columnist Sheila Graham after his move to Hollywood, where he embarked upon a failed career as a screenwriter, Fitzgerald passed away at age 44 of a heart attack, leaving behind his uncompleted fifth novel, The Last Tycoon, which was published posthumously in 1941. Despite the dual tragedies of F. Scott and Zelda, an appreciation for Fitzgerald's work witnessed a resurgence in the early 1950s, transforming F. Scott Fitzgerald into one of the most revered writers of 20th century America. Today in the Daily Dose, Geoffrey Chaucer. Born into a bourgeois family of well-to-do Londoners, sometime around 1340, as a teenager, Geoffrey Chaucer worked as a public servant for Countess Elizabeth of Ulster, the Duke of Clarence's wife, before fighting in the 100 Years' War. Captured at Rethel, his royal connections prompted King Edward III to pay for much of his ransom, before Chaucer spent the rest of his life as a diplomat and public servant to Great Britain and her aristocratic leaders. Marrying Philippa Rowett in 1366, the daughter of Sir Payne Rowett, the marriage did much to advance Chaucer's career in the English court. The couple lived abroad from 1370 to 1373, fulfilling diplomatic missions to Florence, Italy, followed by the establishment of an English port at Genoa. Despite his near-constant work distractions, Chaucer managed to carve out time for his original love, poetry. And while many of his most famous works remained unfinished at the time of his death, his contributions to English literature make his work highly readable, even to this day. Most likely written in 1380, when he spearheaded marriage negotiations between Richard II and Anne of Bohemia, Parliament of Fowls employs poetic allegory, incorporating elements of satiric irony that jabs at the superficial qualities of courtly love. Troilus and Crusade is a narrative poem retelling the tragic love story of Troilus and Crusade during the Trojan War, written in Chaucer's original technique of rhyme royal, which involves rhyming stanzas of 7 lines each. Another important yet unfinished work by Chaucer is The Legend of a Good Woman, which employs short poetic narratives written in iambic pentameter couplets, the first time such a technique was ever used in the English language. Yet his most famous work is Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, which comprises 24 stories in fragmented and varied order, prompting many scholars to challenge the correct intended order of his unfinished work. Chaucer's original vision of writing 120 tales proved to be overly ambitious for a man with a full-time day job, yet his Canterbury Tales remain widely read for the beautiful rhythm of Chaucer's language, along with his clever injections of satirical wit. Passing away in London on October 25, 1400, Chaucer was entombed at Westminster Abbey, the first English writer to inhabit the now legendary Poets' Corner, making the works of Geoffrey Chaucer required reading for English majors everywhere. Today in the Daily Dose, Goody Two-Shoes. Before her name became synonymous with over-the-top virtue and prudishness, few people living today comprehend the profound impact of the first English-language children's novel, The History of Little Goody Two-Shoes. First published anonymously in 1765 by John Newbery, one of the first publishers of children's books, the wildly popular novel tells the story of impoverished and one-shoed Marjorie Meanwell. After her indebted father falls ill and dies, 2 loan sharks named Sir Gripe and Farmer Grassball take what little money he had left, obliging Marjorie and her brother to fend for themselves as penniless, homeless orphans. A wealthy benefactor adopts her brother but leaves Marjorie behind, bequeathing her a scant consolation prize of a pair of new shoes. Overcome with excitement and joy, she runs through her town, exclaiming to a clergyman's wife, "2 shoes, ma'am, 2 shoes," earning her nickname amongst the villagers at large. During a time when women and girls were considered incapable of governing themselves, Marjorie Meanwell's adventures offered a starkly different narrative regarding gender norms of the day. Over the course of this Cinderella-like story, Marjorie Meanwell chronicles her struggles to teach herself to read, to stand up for animal rights, to overcome accusations of witchcraft, to foil a major robbery, to open a school and to earn her own living without the assistance of a man, achieving an educated, self-made womanhood in stark opposition to what 18th century British society thought women were capable of. Considered by many scholars to be the work of Anglo-Irish writer Oliver Goldsmith, Goody Two-Shoes became wildly popular with young readers in the 18th and 19th centuries, breaking all social and literary barriers of the day, while teaching young readers foundational values such as generosity, the benefits of hard work, and the fundamental virtues of an educated mind. Over the later part of the book, Marjorie teaches her students to focus on meditative, critical thinking with the prop of a hat she dubs her considering cap, which is the first reference in English literature of a thinking cap, making Goody Two-Shoes a breakout rebellion against 18th century expectations of what a woman could be. And there you have it, Goody Two-Shoes, today on the Daily Dose. Get your nerd on with the Daily Dose. And if you enjoyed today's episode, share the link with a friend or colleague so that they too can learn something new every day.